So what is our agenda for today? Today we will open with using external IDE mode, turning on file system development mode. We will create application and talk about packages. I understand that you've done this already, but now we will do this more from the perspective of app management. We will then go through integration with Git. We will talk about package dependencies, what Creatio data model is, and we will create an object. And we will also deploy a test environment. And for that, we will use a shortcut. We will use a PowerShell script created by one of Creatio employees, Kirill Krylov. And then we will talk about solution delivery to the test environment. So starting with the IDE mode, this is something that you can only do if you have Creatio installed locally. Again, we just to make sure that we are on the same page, you do not have to have a local Creatio installation if you're aiming for fast track. This is a part of the course. A lot of the, not the, well, at least for the first few days, some of items that I do are not expected to be repeated by you. You can test them and try them if you have full control of your environment, if you have all the necessary tools, but this is not a prerequisite. What you will have to have at the end, even if you're running a cloud environment, is Postman. This is a requirement. So if you don't have it now and you aim for fast track certification, please ask your sysadmins to install Postman to your environment. Sorry. So back to enabling IDE mode. Why do we need this in the first place? This, again, is only available to a local Creatio installation, and there are two different use cases for it. First, first use is using better IDEs that one Creatio can provide. So there is Creatio IDE. If I open a C# file, I will see this IDE, and it has also some tooltips. It has some colorations. It will also introduce some warnings and errors, but few things that you need to realize is configuration versus core. Sorry, a moment here. Okay. So few versus core. So configuration essentially means configurable items of Creatio. And everything that we see here in these packages, in these containers, are configurable configuration items. They are grayed out, means they're locked. We will return to this later. So you shouldn't try to make changes, but technically you can make changes. The only problem is if you change something in a package that is grayed out, any Creatio update will simply override your changes. Now, this is still a configuration, but if I go to configuration and, for example, something that I've already seen, so some service here, and I see here the framework core. Now, nowhere in configuration you will see that code, and you are not, this is not part of configuration. So Creatio core is some untouched uh, foundation to how the whole system operates. And configuration items are only meant to employ that foundation and to customize the behavior where necessary. And when we do this, we have Creatio ID as an option. So again, that would be a tool it's the same tool for C# code, or I can go to some client modules and look into the source code. We will work with both. So you will be writing code in C#, you will be writing code in JavaScript, and we will review the structure of this code. But IDEs have this limitation. For example, if I work with C# and I'm implementing some core classes, I won't be able to review them. Also, some external IDEs can be much more helpful. They have IntelliSense, um, so they can provide much more. The only thing that you might think is an option, but it is not, is trying to export a separate configuration item, use external IDE, and then put it back into configuration. In some rare cases, this will work, but this is not what it was intended for. When you export a configuration item, you will obtain a file with metadata that is meant as a backup. And this is very rarely used, actually. We will talk about sharing our configuration with other developers and delivering it to test or prod later on. So how do we enable the file system? The first thing that is the easiest way to understand whether it is on or off is trying to go for actions. And there are two actions that are grayed out by default because this is disabled. And again, I would like to put a pin into the fact that you will not be able to turn this system on cloud. This is only for local environments. And grayed out options to download packages to system or update from file system. So we will now turn this on. And why is to, again, I have to use a local environment to show you the Creatio under the hood. You do not have to have that. But two main reasons that you might have in real life scenarios. First, if you want to use version control, even if you are a single developer in a project. And second is to share your changes with other developers. But this is not meant to deliver your solution to pre-prod or production. So, and if we go to Creatio Academy, as usually, so let's review the content of day 2. We will have, as of now, there's only one link. We will have these two items. I will explain them later, and the zip file for the quick local environment installation. So if we go to Creatio Academy website and we will go through the development on Creatio platform guides, under development tools, we will see Creatio IDEs and external IDEs. Creatio IDEs we've seen. There is a simplistic tool to work with source code. There are much more complex tools for no code, but we're not going to cover those during this course. Though for the external IDEs, we need to enable this mode, so we go for basics. Link to this article is in the links file. And what it says that we need to make some modifications to web config directory. And this is a web config file in root directory. And this is root is very important because when we use run Creatio on Windows using IIS, meaning that we are using .NET framework, here is our build, y3dev. The structure, to remind you, is going to be that loader and the web application are separated, which is also seen in the structure of our application here. So here is our loader, and here is the web application. So root means that we need specifically the web config that is on the loader level. So not in Terrasoft Web App, where there is also a web config and can be easily confused, but in the root folder. So we are modifying this web config. So let's open this file. And our instructions is to turn file design mode. Well, this one makes sense. And then also use static file content flag. Now, this might require some extra explanation. So let's talk about key components. Just a moment, let me organize this real quick. So two key components that we're having. This is going to be a little bit harder to understand, but this is an important part of the explanation because you should have proper expectations on how file system works. Sometimes you might think it misbehaves. It's not. It's just the complexity of the structure. We're not going to dive here too deep because, again, this is still a beginner course. Creatio beginner, I mean. But if you want, you can stay and we can discuss this in a greater detail. So, two different key components of Creatio. I have my file system, and here is my Terrasoft web app, and here is my Terrasoft configuration, and I have my database. My database is the, let me put this in words. Generally, in most of the cases, this is the source of truth in both modes. Doesn't matter whether I'm using DB development mode or file system mode. And and my file system is a working copy. To simplify, what it means that when I'm activating file system, it means that when Creatio is running code, in most of scenario, it's going to be running the code that is stored as the column values in rows in system tables. Working copy means that using an action that we will look into later, specifically download packages to file system, we will update our file system with whatever we've modified in Creatio IDE so that we can open these files with external IDEs, make modifications, and then run update packages from file system to modify our source of truth. But this is a little bit of a simplification because if you dive deeper, the truth is a little bit more complex. For example, and the reason why we need to discuss this is this use static file content. So what it means is this. If I go to my database and I will now, here is my Y3 dev, I will now run a query to, just a moment, select top 5. Um, so how this code is stored in database. So system schema is, we will talk about this very soon, but essentially most of the configuration items are schemas. They can be object, that can be pages, for example. And I've just selected 5 system schemas. And among values here, what I see is metadata. This is a coded text. And depending on schema type, this can be JavaScript text, this can be JSON text, this can be C# text. So it doesn't look like any of that syntaxes because this is encoded with byte 64. So it already doesn't look as a syntaxes. It can be decoded, but essentially it is some text. So the longer way to process is, for example, when application server receives a query to open a page, um, application server will load these codes of the schema. It will load not one, but many JavaScript texts, and our browser will interpret it to build a page. But this is a longer way. So to make process faster and easier, what is happening instead by default, which we are going to deactivate, is that system will use instead our web application to load some pre-built pages. Those are static files. We will see a lot of JSON files in our web app. So it will load some pre-built files and making the loading process faster. And the instruction is that file design mode is incompatible with static file content. So we'll need to turn this false. Now, another important thing, because we already dived here, so we need to cover that as well, is the C# code. C# code, unlike JavaScript, is compiled into assemblies that are only then processed by your application server, Windows worker process in our scenario. And because of that, this metadata can still contain C# code as a source of truth, but what is executed is actually in our application. And because we're using .NET framework, it employs a file locker. So we have these bin folders, and they will contain those assemblies. So even though file system is a working copy, when application server is executing code that was written is in C#, it will be through loading these assemblies that are not in database, even though database still remains source of truth. I hope this is not too confusing, but it is important um, to understand because employing file system development mode does require a lot of you will have to be a lot of discipline. You will have to be very, very careful. And you might see some unexpected behavior. So long story short, the idea is Creatio IDE is always available, no matter if I did or did not enable file system mode. It will always be available, so I can always work with Creatio IDEs, low code or no code. File system on or after activation. If I make some changes in Creatio IDE here or in Freedom UI Designer, the content over here will not, well, sometimes it will because of what I just tried to explain. Sometimes it will, but I should not expect that in my file system, these changes are applied. you will in fact see that they are, but not completely and not fully. This is why discipline is super important. This is due to the complexity of how file system cooperates with database. But when I make changes over here, I'm changing the source of truth. I'm changing the database. So even though some files will be updated in file system, I should not rely on that. If I want to use external editors to make some modifications, we don't have our own package yet to do this, but to make some modifications, say that these are our packages. If I want to modify anything in here, I should update my file system from my database, which is source of truth, make modifications, then I would need to return them and compile. And we will do all that. So now back to instruction. Use static file content. Those pre-built pages should be turned to false, which means that from now on, loading Creatio pages on our development environment will be just a touch slower than it was by default. Oh, sorry, this is for .NET. The instruction is the same though. Just a touch slower, but this is mandatory to be able to turn on the file design mode. So we have web config file opened. Let's find it. Use static file content. We're switching from true to false. Back to instruction, and now we can turn on file design mode. Back here. Not this one, not this one, this one. File design mode enabled, false, turning this to true. Saving our changes. And now if I go back to my Creatio and try to do anything at all, you will see that it seems unoperational. This is totally fine. The problem is, it's not a problem. The thing is that Microsoft IIS did recognize that some changes were made to web config file. And what it did just now, it did a hidden restart. So this is why Creatio wasn't available. Sometimes you might think that this is glitched, but this is actually a precautious that comes from your action. And now I see two actions available: download packages to file system, so from database source truth to file system. And once I modify anything in file system to make these changes actually happen in Creatio, it's going to be update packages from file system. But the last step here is to compile system again. And an important thing that, again, due to this back and forth, source of truth versus active copy, if you build new app and you try to enable file system development mode before you compile, it will not work. Also, if you enable file system and you do not compile afterwards, it will not work. This is necessary to align all the assemblies. So before enabling file system, after you've created new environment locally, you need to compile, and after activation of the file system dev mode, you also need to compile. If skipped, you will be facing some issues. So we'll give this a moment. Again, this is necessary for maybe bigger projects. In our own work team that builds Creatio app for Creatio company, Because we use only cloud environment for development, obviously we don't have this access to file system. And having a local environment is not necessarily something that you will do in phase one. Usually, phase one of ID development is comparatively simple. And maybe you can use simply cloud on that, and only when the time comes, you deploy local environment if later stages of development become more demanding and complex. Also, the only way to exchange, proper way, not technically the only way, but the only proper way to exchange your changes with other developers is through version control. And version control is only available if you have file system on. Your version control will not rely on Creatio web application. In fact, Creatio will not be aware of any version control, and version control will not be aware of your web application. Instead, your version control is going to be communicating with your file system and its content. So we will be building our own application. That application will become also a separate package or a collection of packages. We will dive into that later. So version control is only processing file system. And we will see this in action. So now that we've recompiled, I will download packages to file system, which will also take some time. But now my file system will be updated from database. And we see that a new package custom was added to file system that wasn't existed. In fact, this is not the only change. For example, if I go to auto-generated, I will see that there are some changes in source folder here. Sorry. And I will see that all these items, this is my local time, 12:30. All these items were just generated from now. These items are not meant for modifications. These items are meant for some debugging. But if I go to my package folder, which is a representation of all these packages, I will see that among them, can now find the custom package. There it is. Custom package is a new package. So now our file um, file development mode is enabled. We will use this later on, but it is very important that even at this stage you understand that if you have an access to some files here, it doesn't necessarily mean, no, it's not that, usually it is not meant for modification. So you can use external IDEs to better understand the architecture. You can use external IDEs to modify your own components, and only some of them, we will talk about which ones, but not all components. And we're about to build a new application. But before that, we will dive into the packages and versus applications and configuration items. So we were talking about schemas. This is to remind a query about schemas. And we will look into different items. We will, we can add skills from here. This is new to 832. Cool item, because I myself do prefer configuration versus application hub or other items. But essentially, we have a lot of such configuration items. To be more precise, um, We have 6,200 such schemas. So obviously, having them in all in one place would be impossible to navigate through and to work with. So what Creatio developers did, they organized this 6,000 configuration items into packages so that it is easier to maintain them. Those packages are still part of the configuration. This is meant for you to be able at any given time to open any configuration items and maybe try to understand this when necessary. And also, maybe this one is going to be more useful. And if necessary, make replacing schemas so that Creatio updates will not override. So you can still read them even if they are not meant for immediate modification, but you know how you can create replacing pages, replacing objects, and you can still do this. And so they are organized into these packages for you to be able to maintain all these items in the first place. So essentially, a package is a container of configuration items. But as the solution becomes bigger and bigger, and your own customizations become more and more complex, a newer higher level was introduced, which is called an application. An application is a collection of packages. So in itself, it doesn't store any configuration items. It's more of a metadata file that connects multiple packages together, but also has some very useful properties such as dependencies. And we are now going to build our own application. So back to main application environment, application hub, new application. And during no-code course, and this is something that you will be using most frequently, you would use this template records and business processes, which, as you probably know by now, will create a section, a list page, a form page, an object, and you're all ready to go. But there are some downsides that, for example, your newly created object will have some structure because of it already have been involved in a section. So you will have a name value, which will be set to displayed value. So you will sometimes prefer to go with custom, and it has some differences. So custom means empty. We will not have anything pre-configured in the custom for us. And we will give our application name, and I will ask you to do the same. And the application name is going to be user yacht. We will build a dummy application. It's not going to be as complete as in no-code course. It's going to be a dummy application where the idea is that we will be renting out our fleet of yachts. And we will need to add a prefix. The default prefix, application name is yacht. But if I go to advanced parameters, I will see that prefix had been added to my application name. This happens automatically. So prefix is something that you also probably know. This is a global variable system setting. Those are global variables that can be cached if necessary. One of those is prefix. Prefix is meant to tell you who is the author of certain functionality. And we have default USR, and what are the best approaches to employ this? Now, if you are building a marketplace solution, that other people will be downloading to enhance their Creatio experiences, then that prefix, yeah, so before that, who developed, by who, I don't mean a person, I mean a business entity. So if you see a schema name that doesn't have any prefix, name is code, title is title, name is code. So if you have a schema that has a code that doesn't have any prefix, it means that this is an older schema that was built by Creatio developers. For some years now, a new convention is to add a CRT prefix. So if it doesn't have a prefix or it has a CRT prefix, it means that this was developed by Creatio employees. If it has any other prefix, that it means that this was built by other business entities. Maybe this is because you've downloaded a solution from Marketplace, and so Creatio partner built it, or maybe you are co-developing with someone. Now, if you are building for Marketplace, having a proper prefix is necessary for people to recognize uh, who the author is. For example, if I would have a company called Yuri Software, my prefix would be something like this: Yankee Romeo, Sierra Foxtrot Tango. So 5 characters is more or less maximum, recommended maximum, obviously, because this is going to be repetitive. If I'm including some um, references in my code, then my schema name will have this prefix, schema code will have this prefix, column code will have this prefix. Then if in that I'm referring to other schema, that schema will also have prefix. So this is going to be a repetitive stuff. So it's going to be like prefix, unique contact schema, prefix, unique contact name, prefix, unique account, and so on and so on. So you need to keep them short, and also never use a digit for a first symbol, but this is a generally good recommendation to avoid that. Now, when you co-developing with your customer, with other integrators, I think that the safest is to keep user prefix untouched. That is because if you use your own prefix, for example, this prefix, to identify that this is an entity, an object, for example, that was created by a company that stands behind this alias, then what it means, oh, sorry, no, that's correct, I think, yeah. That means that if your client will want to make their own modifications within that same schema, they will be forced to use this prefix. Columns in the same object cannot have different prefixes. They have to be aligned. And also we will see this in other, sorry, I see some changes in, but I didn't catch in our attended. Did someone just rejoin? Oh, I think someone left. Okay, so this prefix um, um, can be a little bit restrictive. So if you are co-developing, sometimes it's easier to keep it default user. So it's a universal prefix to everyone. So we will keep it as it is. Now, if you are not developing in English, then it is important that you go to advanced parameters, because this application code will only work as long as you're using simple Latin characters in application name. If you're not using Latin characters, then Creatio wouldn't know how to translate this, and you will simply create some gibberish code here. So it is important to check. And now we're building our app. Because it's an empty app, it is going to be built super fast. And now we have an application which is higher level in hierarchy and package also. And if we go back to configuration, and there is, by the way, a shortcut to that, which can be useful because if, for example, you're loading your app and it doesn't work, at least you can go to configuration and try to open um, to find some errors in there. So zero dev, zero because we are running this on Windows. Will navigate us to configuration, and now we see our new package yacht. So an application will have at least one package. It can have more, but at least one is mandatory. And now whatever is in the scope of that application will fall into this yacht package. But how to maintain your packages in the first place? How many of them should you have for your applications and so on and so forth? So the simplest possible approach would be to have, sorry, lost me. The simplest possible approach would be to have one master application with one master package. This way, this way, you will not have to take a care um, take a care package. Sorry, I'm not sure about the spelling, but I hope you will forgive me for that. Package, I think CK. But you will not need to take care about dependency, so it's going to be very simple. What it means is that in your configuration, all items that are related to your solution, and by solution I mean like the every configuration items that you've created for a specific customer or for you if you are a client of Creatio, will be stored in the same single package. Now, the downside to this is that in time, it may be a little bit hard to maintain. Imagine a package that has few hundred configuration items. It might become a little bit hard to navigate through that. And you will need to document your schemas very well so that I can easily search which configuration item is meant for what. So when do we use the single package approach? Only when it's small, medium business. So uh, the an easy answer to how should I structure? Should I have one or many packages? Is the first question, is it SMB? If it is, solution might still be complex. The project might still be kind of challenging, and I still might require more than one package. But if it's not SMB, then one master package will not work. So what are our alternatives then? Well, what we can do is we can build multiple packages, multiple applications as separate solutions. Say application one for our human resources, application two, everything that is related to our sales team, application three, everything that is related to our logistics, application including like deliveries and warehouses, etc. Application 4, everything that is related to procurement. This will also need to be documented very well, but this can become in time very complicated because in time your HR will need to rely an item from here. Then 3 years later, as you keep developing, you will create a replacing schema to an original schema then that is in this HR application. And so you will see the cyclic dependencies. We will return to that later on, and this will become a problem. So Another alternative, which is in the midst of much more complicated architecture and the super simple one master package, is taking the benefit of the application that can have multiple packages. So you will still have one application, and that application has its description, it can be versioned, you can pre-configure some dependencies, but this is only useful when you are building a marketplace app. For example, if you build a marketplace application that requires, say, Creatio sales, enhances Creatio sales experiences, then you would add this to dependencies. But essentially, it kind of put together some packages as in form of metadata that these packages come together. And this is very useful for delivery because we will later learn that we can simply export an application and all application content, meaning all application packages, will come as a zip archive. So instead, we can have this. We can have one master application, one master package. That master package will probably contain your contact schema and some other low-level schemas, but then you will have multiple packages. So let me elaborate. This is app, and this is package. And these are also packages. And so you will have multiple packages. They all will be dependent on master package. We will talk about dependencies. And master package is going to be primary package to our application. How to set up a primary package? By default, we already have this user yacht as primary package. So in our configuration, we still can add packages manually over here, and they can they might not be connected to any applications in all. In fact, if you have one master package that maybe having an app is obsolete, but you might reconsider that later. So modern approach would be not to add packages manually immediately to configuration, but to connect them to applications. So now our application user yacht has a simple package in here. And our next item is going to be integration with Git. And again, I would encourage you to interrupt me and ask your questions if you have any. I understand that this is complex. This is not the only time we will talk about packages, applications, dependencies, and recommendations. This is going to be back and forth because this is a maybe a little bit of a tricky subject, which is also open to a lot of misconceptions. But now I have my package. And I'm going to create my first configuration item that I will use simply as a uh, dummy item
Sorry
so
for
that
the interruption. Sorry. This step will be for both local and if you work in creative development platform.
so you mean if this is relevant to cloud?
Yes, cloud or to local.
Yes. So my next step is going to be to introduce to integration with Git. Integration
Yes.
with Git is something that is available only to a local environment. Everything that I was talking about regarding packages, this is relevant to Creatio platform and how it is structured. So this has nothing to do with file system development mode or integration with any kind of version control. The organization of packages and applications is an important part of planning of your application. And so it doesn't matter how you develop it. And mostly, especially at the beginning, you will be developing in cloud. So I will be using now Git,
Yes.
which is completely optional for you, only if you were able to install a local environment. But packages is unrelated. It's a separate from Git item. So this is unrelated to Git. Make sense?
Okay, so that makes sense. So if I prefer to work in cloud, this doesn't matter for me. Yes.
Git doesn't matter.
Yes.
The next demonstration doesn't matter. Packages are still the same. Packages
Yeah.
and the information about packages, you will be still using the database development mode, meaning that you will be writing changes into databases. So your schemas will be having some references, what they replace, how they replace, and so on and so forth. And
Yes.
these dependencies, the structure of your app still matters in the exact same manner. This doesn't relate to whether it is a local or cloud environment. This is a architecture of the solution.
Yes. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so um, we're going to create a dummy process, and we also have a uh, default package. And by the way, one more thing, though it might be not a given. So as you can see, this user yacht is yellow, which means that it is open to modification, just the same as the custom package. Custom package was reworked. We will talk about that. But essentially, as of now, these are only two containers that I can use to add new configuration items to. These grayed out means that they are locked. Locked means that I should not make any modifications to them. I can technically unlock them. We will learn how. There is also an option which can be used only on your own packages and as an edge case to unlock for hotfix, which is a very temporarily unlock. But again, this is not something that you um, should do lightly. Now, there is also one thing that might be a little bit confusing. This small locker near custom. You can disregard this locker because this is related to something that is no longer, well, it is supported and some might still use, but this is locking and unlocking packages in SVN version control system, which is a little bit outdated, integrated version control with the Creatio. So you will only see this if you will be included in some very old projects. So it's still supported, but it's a little bit updated. If you see SVN anywhere, you can simply ignore. And this small locker next to custom is related to SVN. You can simply ignore this. Yellow is what indicates that this is operational package that I can modify. Custom package, among other things, was meant to capture your modifications. This is more for no-code developers when they didn't care where they're storing items, which could be problematic. But for example, if I simply go to process library and hit new process, it will mean that I'm outside of the scope of application or package. I just hit new process. So this process will have to be stored at least somewhere. And so the default value would be the custom package. If I am a little bit careless and I do not check where I store, such items will by default fall into custom. Now, we will talk about custom later and how it can be employed, but most of the items that we create are meant for delivery, so they shouldn't be in custom. And instead, we're going to use our yacht package. And I'm going to create a dummy item. The easiest one is business process. So I'm creating a new business process, inserting, I have now yacht package selected, so it will be inserted, oh, sorry, it will be inserted into yacht. And I'll call this dummy process. Under settings, I will need to provide code including my prefix. And I'll save this. This process does nothing. So hopefully you already have some experience with business processes. This process will do nothing. I'll just need this as an item. Now, actually, if I would go to my file system, I would see some changes immediately over there. I shouldn't rely on that. They are incomplete. This is again because of Creatio being multi-layer, because it employs many syntaxes that are executed differently. So some changes may be applied immediately, and this might be confusing. We don't even look into file system before we run operation, download packages to file system. Now I am using my source of truth, my database, and update my active copy, my file system. Only afterwards, I can work with my items in my file system. So we see that new schema process had been added, and also files in package had been added. This is where we sometimes will be adding some, for example, intermediate DLLs that will connect our assemblies. So now if I go to my file system, again, y3dev, Terrasoft configuration. So first, this is my root, Terrasoft web application, including core, Terrasoft configuration, package list of package files. And you will see some difference here. You have fewer folders comparing to uh, number of packages. I think we've looked into this. System packages. So we have 6,000 configuration items that are stored in 163 packages. And not all of them have file content. So this is why not all of them are represented in file system. But now we will see our user yacht in file system that is after that download. And under schemas, we will see our dummy process schema. And it contains 3 metadata files. In fact, it's a little bit more because it's added in other libraries as well. But it has a descriptor of my business process, the properties of my business process, and metadata. This is all metadata. So it's not very descriptive, and metadata is not meant for modification. And if, for example, you open a file and you see JavaScript task, it doesn't mean that you can easily modify the JavaScript if you are a JavaScript professional and expect these changes to be working. If you try to modify the metadata, then Creatio executors will not be able to process this. So you shouldn't expect it to be operational. But this is how your business process looks in real life scenario. And this is part of the business process that you will be delivering and you will be sharing with other developers. So now to that sharing. Now that I have my file system activated, I have this configuration, I can actually share this with my other developers. And we discussed how we should not send changes directly. So something that you might think, oh, maybe I can just simply export my package or export my application and I don't know, send that archive via email to my colleague. You should never try to do this because if, for example, I created a dummy process and Abanub created a schema, a page schema, client module, an interface, user interface. Um, and I sent him my archive that he will install. The loader will recognize that there is a new process, but the schema that Abanub was working on is no longer relevant. It's not present, so evidently they deleted it. And so by installing my package, Abanub will delete his interface, that page he was working on. So this is not the way. The only way is to use version control, where we will be seeing versioning and when we will be updating file system through the version control system. And afterwards, we can update package from file system. So let's crank it step by step. So first, I will use a more simple Visual Studio Code as an example for Git integration, but I think that it is time for us to take a break. We're in quite deep. So I have 08 at my clock. Let's get back to it in 15, which is 23 minutes. Okay, give me a thumbs up and we will dive into Git integration. Okay, perfect. See you in 15. Okay, so now we've developed some, well, jokingly useful configuration item in our newly created package, and I'm co-developing with someone else, so I need to share this with them. And because we're using local environments in this example for development, it means that that person is also using their own local environment. I need to share this using version control, and we are going to be using Git as an example. We will use GitHub for cloud repository. Maybe you will consider some more private and secure service like GitLab, but we will use, it doesn't matter which version control you're using, because again, version control is communicating with, well, the namespace that you select with the folder that you select. So it doesn't know that this is a web application that is actually running and that you're going to use this only as an active copy to update your source of truth database. This is all unnecessary to Git. And from Creatio perspective, there were just some changes in your file system. Maybe you did them your own, which we will at some point, or they did derive from some version control. In my example, is going to be in Git. As long as you modify file system and then you run update from file system, it works. It's just that we're going to use Git to make those modifications. Okay, so I'm going to use Visual Studio Code as a simpler example. And if you're using any version, other different version control, or you want to just try, the instruction would be first to create. So let me put this into writing. Step one would be create Git account at github.com. Obtain Visual Studio Code, free of charge, of course. Once you have Visual Studio Code and you have Git account, you will go to the source control tab and you will have to install Git client first into your Visual Studio Code. So instead of these two buttons, you will see a button called install Git or something like it. So step 3, Git client. And then you will have to connect that Git client to your Visual Studio Code. For that, in our day 2, you will see this git config text file, which includes 2 commands that you will need to run in terminal. So you will need to open new terminal and run git config global username, your name first, and git config global user email and your email. After that, you will be able to perform next steps. So now that we have all that in place, we will first create a local repository. So first I'm opening folder, my builds, my Y3Dev, Terrasoft web app. And so here this would include core, just like the loader would. Do I need that? No, I'm not going to process this in any way. Terrasoft configuration includes everything, including all the packages. So let's select packages and carefully consider what is going to be the scope of modifications that I need to version control. If I would be creating an SMB application and I would decide strategically to have one single master package, then you selecting that master package would make sense. Now that I am not sure at this time, I only having one package, but more likely I consider now that maybe I will develop into a something that will need multiple packages, 5, maybe 10. If it's an enterprise, and I know this is going to be heavy on integrations, and I will probably even create separate packages for different integrations to ease the maintenance. So this will not work, obviously. And the core principle is balance. But now I don't know if I will end up with one package or with multiple. So potentially in time as I develop this solution, I will have more and more packages that I will need to track. So selecting just one package will not work. So instead, I will select the package folder for all its content. Select folder. Back to source control. And now Git is scanning whether or not this folder already has some repositories. It might take a moment. It does not. So now we're using this interface button, but this essentially is git init command. And now it created a repository. And if I go to my build, my package, I will see this new folder .git. This is what is used by for repository. So I'm not going to touch anything in here. Git client will take care. These are necessary for this to work. But let's get back to our Visual Studio Code, and we see nearly 6,000 changes. I will now restructure the view to see this as a tree so that it's easier to understand what the problem is. Because I selected package package folder, I am now tracking all the changes in all the packages. But let's consider this. So I'm not going to use custom to share or to deliver. As of now, I'm only using user yacht. So do I need to track these items if I'm not even ever going to make any modifications inside them? So obviously not. I need to somehow exclude them. And there is a special file type, git ignore. And we can go to our day two, and here is this git ignore. Essentially, it will be outdated in time. But if I open this, not here, not yet here. If I open this, maybe with this time with just a text file, you will see that this file essentially what it says is a selection. It's a properly pre-configured, but in its core, it's a selection of configuration packages that should be ignored. So can simply copy this file, go back to my build, and add it inside package folder. This, if you will be using the file that I will share, will be outdated with most minor releases. In fact, it is already outdated for the example, because now I see that it looks much better, but I still see some unnecessary items. So here is my yacht. This is what I want. But here are some new items that I do not want. This is because since the last time gitignore was modified with the latest release, I'm not sure that these are exactly for 8.3.2. I just added few items as, for example, maybe they're older than 8.3.2. But with next minor release, some more packages will be introduced into configuration by Creatio team. And so if I use the same static gitignore file, it will not know of these new packages. So what I want to do now is to modify this gitignore. And here is my list of packages to ignore. And so I only interested in yacht. I don't need CRT filter agent. So I do not want you. And I can simply add this over here. CRT filter agent. And next, CRT tech user Creatio maintenance. Creatio, Creatio. Well, I apparently evidently have made some maintain. Yeah, made a typo. Well, there is more typo, but I think you get the drill. So one we've already taken care of, so we're not going to waste any more time. But now what I see here is that I only have, instead of 6,000 changes, I only have over 40 changes. And tag user Creatio maintenance. Yeah, because yeah, so now this is also excluded. But essentially you will see more and more items here that you will have to exclude by modifying your gitignore. Don't forget to save changes, obviously. So now I only have user yacht. This is the only package contents of which will be tracked within the file system. And now by default, I think that so-called smart staging is active. I'm not sure if that is the case. So maybe you will skip this step. I will now stage my changes, and I can now make my very first commit in this project. Very first commit and commit. So the commit is ready. We will be talking about branches later. So now I have my local repository that I will be connecting to my cloud repository. I am creating a new repository. Um, I'll call this guided learning. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out new naming convention. Uh, December 26, oh, sorry, December, January 26, guided learning dev, probably January 26. So I can describe this. I can add a readme file. I can add git ignore file, but we already added that. License if necessary, no licenses. This is going to be a publicly available repository. And thankfully, I have some extra instructions how to connect these. So this is the from the scratch process, but we already made our first commit. So we will start from here. If repository exists, we will simply copy paste this. So it already includes the name of repository. So I will copy this three commands. I will need to open terminal for this. First command. Second, to create main branch. And to make the very first push into the cloud repository. Now, if I go here, I will see that this is no longer empty. I have one commit, the very first commit, and I'm tracking user yacht, and I have my git ignore. And it also related to solution that is in package, but we will talk about solution later. So now another developer can download this to their file system by pulling the changes. If they are also, so obviously they also will need to have their local repository connected to cloud repository. They will be pulling these changes to the file system. Now it's only in file system. They will still have to um, download, update packages from the file system, and then, very important, to compile. Only afterwards, their local web application will reflect the changes that have been introduced. So just as an example, let's make some very important changes into our project. I am simply repositioning the termination event, which will change the metadata that is responsible for item position on the business process schema. So this is a pretense super important change. I've just modified, and I need to share this with my colleagues. So step one would be to download packages to file system. So once I do this, okay, so we see that schema is being modified. Okay. Now let's go to Git client, and we see that there were in fact some changes, and now we can track where these changes were. And the only item that is modified are actually the positioning of an item. So very small changes. It's not very easy to read because this is a metadata file. If we would be changing some C# or JavaScript files, it may be a little bit easier to comprehend, but there is still some changes. So we will commit this as um, stage changes, dummy modified. And we can push and pull, but with simply clicking this sync changes button, it does both operations, meaning that not only I am posting the changes to cloud repository, but I'm also getting whatever other changes there are in cloud repository. Let's refresh. And we see that there are now two commits here. Dummy modified is the second commit. And we can also track the modifications in these files. So in fact, even if I was the single developer, having this tool, so not necessarily to share, but having this tool would help me track changes, save my versions, track where and what I modified, easily backroll, because in Creatio, as soon as I made these modifications, there is no turning back. There is no any backups that I can return my previous version of my dummy process. Um, the only way to do any of that is with the help of version control. Also very important is to remember, I will repeat that in time because this is another thing that easily frequently causes mistakes, is the properly switch the mode when your um, type of modification switches. As long as you create in Creatio IDE, you stay in Creatio IDE. It's not a back and forth. It's not like I can do this modification and then, oh, hey, and I was wanting to make some modification to some JavaScript file, and so I would jump to that JavaScript file in my file system, modify it somewhere there, and then I will postpone these actions. It doesn't work this way. If I modified my business process and I just remember that I need to change my source code and I need to modify it in file system, I have to first download packages to file system. It doesn't matter what I modified. You might think, well, but how is this important? Business process is unrelated to that in no way if I've only just downloaded packages to file system 20 minutes back. It is important. These modifications, they modify a lot of auto-generated files. So what um, auto-generated files, assemblies. So what looks like a single item here, as we've seen in our schema, is not necessarily so. This is a simplification and putting items together so that it's easier to work with in Creatio IDE. It is easier to comprehend by no-code creators and so on and so forth. Where when we've seen the actual representation was different. Oh, sorry. Actual representation was 3 files. In fact, that is 6 files. So even when unrelated, then I download to file system. In my file system, I make those modifications to unrelated JavaScript file. After that, if I need to make something in Creatio IDE, so I close my Visual Studio or Rider or whatever and go back to Creatio application, I update packages from file system, I compile. Now, why do I need to compile? That was just JavaScript, wasn't it? Um, Again, this is a mandatory step and the only safe way to work with Creatio. So I compile and I make some further modifications, even if they are completely unrelated So as I mentioned, working with file system does require a lot of discipline, and it can be tricky. But you can use this not necessarily to, use external IDEs. You can use this simply to maybe just keep the history of changes and so on. Okay, so to the next task at hand for today. So Git covered, package dependencies, and Creatio objects. Now I have created a package, and I did it differently on purpose. If you create new applications using this template, you will have items connected to necessary packages. Because I used custom, not only I'm missing like the default sections and pages, but also the necessary connections. If I go to my configuration, actions, I can check package dependencies diagram. And if I try to find my user yacht, I will find it here. Uh, a lonely orphan that is not dependent on anyone, and nothing is dependent on my user yacht. What it means is if I will try to, for example, add a new schema, I will create a new object, something simple like traffic lights. And what you usually want to do is to rely on some parent. There is very few exceptions from that. And as I'm trying to click this, nothing happens. There is no selection over here available. So that is because I'm lacking the necessary dependency. These dependencies, they reflect the possibility. These are your references, right? You can either, if you can use items that are in different packages, but they are also represent the order of build. So this is how this whole thing is looking. It looks a little bit different since 8.3.2 latest release because of the modification of custom package and some AI packages added. So what I need to do, I need to connect my user yacht and to make it dependent on and this is recommendation, CRT core. CRT core as a package also has its own dependencies, and through this dependency, user yacht will have access to almost everything in the platform. Now, in previous, if you've already working in Creatio for some time, previous recommendation would be to rely on the product core. But this recommendation is obsolete. It's no longer relevant. This package will remain because there are already some solutions that are built around that dependencies. New solutions should be dependent on CRT core. So how do we do this? Back to configuration. This is also available in Application Hub, definitely. But I think that in development mode, you will probably use configuration more frequently. That is because, well, there are more control items, more actions available. So, and you have access to other items where you can simply use this as examples, very useful. So we are using more configuration in this course. So user yacht, I will go to properties of this package. And here we have this depends on packages. I will make it dependent on CRT core and apply changes. Now, if I go back to dependencies diagram, my user yacht is no longer here. Instead, I will see it here, and so it's dependent on CRT core. So now we will try again, back to user yacht, add object, code, traffic, lights, title, more or less the same, parent object, and because I want to create this as a lookup, I will select base lookup. I will confirm this choice. And from my parent, I will inherit some columns that are necessary for lookups. These will include basic Creatio columns, created by, modified by, created on, modified on. These are very important so that every entity has an owner, every instance has an owner. So we are relying on that a lot. You can have objects without those. So maybe let's reflect again on what an object is. Probably something that you know, but just to be on the safe side. A Creatio object does two things. It is responsible for logic layer, but it also describes a table on a physical layer. So as part of the logic, a an object is an instantiated class that has its own properties. Some are simple data types, others are also classes. And it will, an object will be instantiated with respect to those properties. This is where we'll process our access rights and so on. But also simultaneously, when I knew an object, I'm also describing a representing table in database. We will see that very, very soon. So now we have a collection of inherited columns. For example, column name is going to be the name of our traffic light. We can add columns of our own, so plus, and we
Yuri,
have, yes,
sorry for interruption.
yep,
Um, okay, now you said the logical layer. What do you mean by logical layer? A physical layer, I know that's the table which will be in the database. Is it correct?
yep, yes,
Okay,
exactly.
what's the meaning of logical layer?
So um, this is going to be a little bit of a simplification, but just at this layer, at this level, let's try to build a diagram, right? So say a user creates a new, let's not talk about traffic lights, maybe contacts. So just give me a second.
Okay,
Mm, Okay, so from page, user creates a um, new contact from interface perspective. So what
yes,
it means that they do a post to application, post command to post call to application server. At the app server, our application, we will create an instance of a contact. How that
okay,
instance is created. So this is at this point, we are not yet relying on database. So an
yes,
instance contact is created and it has its own constructor. For example, we can have some default values for contact. maybe not really business applicable for a contact to have default values. But if you see on my screen, so here is a default value, we can introduce such logics that when a new contact is created, say their default category is going to be filled in with public category, maybe, right? So they can have their constructors, they can have some access rights which will also be applied, like this instance of contact should only be available to the person who instantiated this contact. So with the respect of with access rights and so on. So this is logic layer. Why it's not physics layer? Because at this
Yes.
point in time, this is not in database. It's just an instance of a contact uh, that is on application server. So this is what I mean by logic layer. What happens next, though, this is then translated with
To
the
the
use.
physical layer or
Yeah, so we would then use uh sorry, how let me so we this will then, with the help of object relational mapping, will be translated into a SQL query to insert um, into database, which is the physical layer. So after the insertion happens, in that respective table of contacts, we will have a new record. So, and what I'm saying in Creatio, object is something that is both responsible for the logic layer, how these objects are instantiated, um, so this is a logic layer, but they also at the same time describe a database table. Does it make sense?
recap what I get. First, the user, which may be client or UI, will create an object or a request, for example.
Mhm.
Then the logic layer will process, for example, if he will add constant value or will calculate some calculation, whatever processing will happen.
Mhm.
Then this layer will use ORM or object relation mapping to make a SQL query to save this object into the database.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
So this is how with this single item, we both uh, create now a logic for traffic lights and also the physics for the actual data storage. Okay, user traffic lights, base lookup. Yeah, so we have inherited from base lookup columns, and we will add a new column. So what column types we have? We have some text column types. Um, we have limited text, 50 characters to 5,500. They're Unicode. In data table, they will be represented as in varchar. You cannot have any other custom limits. So if you need 400 characters, you just use the closest that is larger. So that would be text limited to 500 characters. We also have unlimited length text, which is only limited by the maximum query size. Will depend on database. It's the standard would be 2 GB, but 2 GB of characters is practically limitless. We have rich text, um, which is a formatted text, so it can also use some styles, and you can even insert links and images in there. We have phone number and web link and email address. Those are also limited text, but they have masks applied, and they also have some validations. For example, email address, we'll check for at and dot. Encrypted string is a comparatively new one. The encrypted string will allow you to hide like bank card numbers, etc. CRC, I never heard of use of CRC. This is actually, interestingly enough, is an integer, but unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to offer you an example of this usage. I think this might probably be a legacy item. For numbers, so we have integers. We will now use integer. We have decimals. Most decimals, but currency are limited to 18 characters with different number of digits after the point. Currency is the only one that has, this is a new currency with 3 digits after the point. Previously, we only had one currency. This is a special integer actually type, a very large integer that is, for example, useful for Japanese currency. But in 99% of the cases for currency, you will use this currency with 2 points after decimal, and it is limited to 20 digits in total. Date and type. Date and type is actually a complex class, which interestingly will be storing data universally in UTC-0, but will show to user their current date and type, depending on their user settings. There are many. Lookup is a very important. This is a data type that is actually processing key value pair. It will store the foreign key in database. It will only store the foreign key of related object. On the logic layer, it can show displayed value instead. So instead of showing user some ID of connected entity, we will show the name of the record. If that is something that you would want to dive in deeper, then I will be able to elaborate on that later on. Just ask me when we have some example. We need to put up scenery, and there are a lot of other datas. So we have some blob types, we have our logical Boolean, we have GUID for unique identifier. So all are available. Now we're going to add a new integer. We will call this order, entitled order. This is a comparatively new capability for lookups if you want to order them differently from their alphabetic order, if you want them as a lookup selection. So I can hit save and publish, which is a default action. You can save separately, but this is an outdated action because it is only necessary for older projects that would not compile into separate assemblies. So compilation is a very extensive and long process every time, and you might need to make some modifications step by step and save them before publishing. So the easiest way to work with, and yeah, by the way, we can, as we discussed our logic layer, so we can go here. And here is our new table, user traffic lights. and we can check for its columns. So we have the ID created on, modified on, and a new one, user order in the very bottom integer, not nullable. So this happens after we publish. Now we have logic, now we have physics. Now, how do we work with that object? The easiest way to work with any object is to register them as a lookup. This is not meant for end users, but rather for us. For that, we have this special lookup section. And we will change how the section list works. I think this is very useful. This is an example of classic UI list page. And if I go to select fields to display, I can change my mode from tile view to list view, which I find a little bit easier to work with. And I will, to name, I will also add a new column, which is created on. And save. So now I can sort my lookups by created on. And I will not find my traffic light here, which is different comparing to a different approach that in your no code, for example, if you would be using the drop-down field, and when you don't have a lookup, you have this option to register a new lookup. So if I would use this option, this would also register the object. You will have also that object immediately added to the list of lookup. But instead, we did a more careful and controllable approach where we are adding traffic lights, inserting it into this package of ours. So this is not available as a lookup. And I will now register a new lookup. I will find my new object. I will use object name for the name of the lookup. And now if I sort by created on, I will see my traffic lights at the top of the list. And I will add 3 lights here, just as an example. So red, no, because I've also added an order. So I will once again go to view and select different fields to display. So I want name of my traffic light. And then I need order of my traffic light. And now red will come first. Well, I can index it at 0, obviously, but I think it might be a little bit easier for others to read this. Yellow will come next, and green will come the last. So now, if I will use this as a drop-down on a page, modifying that page, I can choose either it is the order by which that drop-down should put them into proper order, or if it's their name. By name, green will be on top, then red, then yellow. By order will mean that red will come first, then yellow, then green. Now, if I go back to my configuration and look carefully into my object, I will see this asterisk over here. This is an indicator that you made some changes in your configuration that you haven't properly saved to your file system. This is only relevant if you use local environment. If you're developing in cloud, you will see many such asterisks, and you will simply ignore them because you don't have access to file system. So this is irrelevant to you. Now, if I made some changes and I want to share them, just to cement this, first I am downloading my packages to file system. It will take a moment. Now that I've done this, again, my Git will see these changes. I will stage them, and I will call this traffic light added and commit, and use sync to pull and push. And well, I already closed the tab, but we've seen those commitments. So it is important to do this as frequently as possible. But this is the exchange. This is not the delivery mode. So now I will need another test environment in order to discuss solution delivery. And I could create this manually, but you might be wondering, why isn't there a simple setup exe file where you hit like next, 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 and
I'm
you had
sorry,
your
sorry for
yes?
corruption again.
Mhm.
Um, we have finished the third point, which is the package dependencies. That's it. And we are in the fourth point, deployment.
Package, we will be talking about package dependencies more, just with more and more context. So
Yes.
we're not
Okay.
going, to finish a subject completely and jump to the next subject. So we have these routines, but we will be talking about packages later, because as of now, I only have one very simple object, but we will keep building this and we will have more complex examples. So we will still be talking about package dependencies, but I would encourage you to ask questions on these subjects at any time. And
Yes. Okay. 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 Now we will speak about deployment or what?
yeah, so but before we go to deployment, I will now create another environment. I have my dev environment, and
Yes.
yes, I will be talking about deployment
Yes.
soon. So this process is not deployment. This process about sharing and tracking versions. Now, deployment is different, but to show deployment, I need another environment so that my solution will migrate from this environment to another environment. And I could use cloud, but there are some uniqueness to cloud environments, test and demo cloud environments that I will mention later. So it will become very evident why am I deploying test also on premise. And I'm going to save some time by using a PowerShell script to install my Creatio. So if we go to, again, day 2, you will see this zip file, and there will be 3 files instead. The script itself and 2 different command files to run this script. So what are these? This is a quicker way to install Creatio locally. But if you did not install Creatio locally, I do not recommend you to use this PowerShell script first. If you are missing Windows components, you will not see the describing exceptions. We will later learn Clio utility, which will allow you to easily check if you have all necessary Windows components installed from among other things. So I'm sharing this script in confidence that you will only be using this very carefully and responsibly. So let's check the script itself. the script will be running some PowerShell Windows commands in order to make the modifications to what we had to modify manually, like setting up the application pool and registering our applications within default website, then the restoring of database and creating the security logins and creating database users, making them that user database owner. All these steps that yesterday I was doing manually, this script will execute for me. But this is not, again, a simple installation file. We need to carefully take care of what we have to modify within this script file. So first, application name, our server name, and database user, which will also make the proper login as well. Then Redis database number. Now, where the build is, we still need the build to be available. Then where the database files will be. So this is something that I showed previously. I've decided that they are not going to be in default folder. Instead, which also could be an issue depending on how you're running this script. Though no, you still need to run this as an admin with full privileges, because among other things, this script will take control over your IIS, not the manager, but real service. And that is only possible with admin privileges. And this is my databases folder. So I have my databases files here. And so you need to take care of this as well. Make sure that this destination exists. And also, we have some replacing because we're also managing the config file. So this is also very important. So step one, let's once again unpack our build. So I will create a new Y4 test. I have this one. I will explain why I need this later, but we will build a new Y4 test. And back to our builds. So here is my Microsoft SQL running on Windows, 7-zip. I will extract it to, and I will select the destination. It's going to be my local PC. And I will create a new folder here, Y4 test. Okay, and okay. Again, it will require some time. So why is this not automated? Because Creatio is multi-platform, and some partners do have some Docker images, but I think this is primarily for Linux. I'm not into IPs. I don't know how this would work, but I think that doing the same for Windows might be having some issues. So instead, we put together all the necessary Windows components manually. We only do this once in our Windows environment. And now that we have them, we can run this script to install our, not install, we have unpacked our solution, and now with the script we'll make necessary modifications, including IIS, database, and config file. So let's make sure that it was unpacked properly. Y4 test folder is empty. New folder. It was not. Not a problem. I will delete this one. I probably did not select it properly. Y for test. And you might think, now why would I have to unpack if I already have this Y3, if I already have this Y3 dev? So couldn't I have just copied and pasted it and then just modify the config file? I could not, definitely not, because after the compilation, a lot of this file content was changed. It includes a lot of metadata. So copy pasting it to try to create a new Creatio instance is a bad idea. Now, this PowerShell script will be outdated again with the next minor release. In fact, I've already modified this, but with the next minor release, this will be changed, like this whole thing, because what it does, it searches for the exact same text in your config file to or change it with to replace that with this, right? So if and with newer builds, this value, not just this also might change, but primarily this value will be different with newer releases. So if you will be using this script, you will have to do this very, very carefully. So to make sure that I'm installing properly, I first go to my build. I open my connection string config file, and I find what is here as the default state for an unpacked Creatio build. And I copy this very carefully to my PowerShell script. Oops. Data source. Wasn't that careful? Control C. So in my scenario, I didn't actually change anything because I already modified, but you will very likely fall into this issue if you will be doing this anytime after this minor release, if you will be using this script file. Okay, so this is being taken care of. Now, application name is going to be Y4 test. Server name, correct. User is going to be Y4 login. Redis database number is going to be 4. I'll make changes to the script. Now to run this script, I will have, I've offered you two options to run this script. You will see two files in your, two CMD files. Those are simple run, and we can actually check this. Sorry, this is a bit new to me because I'm used to a different Explorer. I use ++ for Explorer. So this is a simple run command, but in my Windows instance, I'm having troubles running this because of some access rights. So if you will have the same, there is another option to run this same with a bypass. And now to run this, again, I will have to have admin privileges. So I will not be able to use this from Windows Explorer. I'll need to log in off screen with my very special credentials. So now I'm running this as administrator. And the thing is, unfortunately, when I was trying to do this live, I'm usually lacking resources, so I'm failing and running into a I'm running into, so I'm trying to close everything to release all the necessary resources. So if I try this, I'm having an issues. This is because of the Microsoft protection, because of the subscription of the file itself. So now I will try the same with bypass. And unfortunately, I have my another one, but restoring Microsoft SQL database is very, very resource demanding. So I can now run into a timeout issue. And Zoom is very also consuming. So my recommendation will be, if you're running this script, just close everything, run just this script, because Windows commands have this certain expectancy for execution in the query. Yeah, so this happened. And database user cannot be opened. This is in the middle of restore. So database restoration just went too long. But just before we started today, so I will create this. This is actually a good exercise for us as well. But just before we started today, I also created another one, Y2 test, with the exact same script. So nothing changed. The only problem is I can't, unfortunately, do this live. So I will run the same script before we do this tomorrow, yesterday. So maybe I don't need my Y2 test today, because now instead of talking delivery, Abanub, we will talk about delivery yesterday because you had a question. So let me reflect that in program. But now we will exercise how to properly, because this is not an easy thing, how to properly clear everything that I have just created with this script, because what I want to do, when we are done, I will be running the same script. I want the same name for my application. I want the same name for my login. But more likely than not, I have just created artifacts that I need to clear, and they have a lot of components. So how would I do about it? So obviously this will not run because we did not restore even our database properly. So and when executing the logging items, they wouldn't work. So let's carefully take care of this one by one. First, I need to check my IIS manager. Let me relaunch it and check if the application was added. Here is my application, Y4 test. The um, order is very important here. So first, I need to delete the zero app, the core app. I need to remove it first, not just jump into Y4 test. If I delete root app, this one still remains and it will create issues for me later. Okay, now I will remove the Y4 test app. Now I will go to application pool, and only now I can delete Y4 test pool. Perfect. So IIS is taken care of. Now back to database. And this is my test. It's in restoration, but I might have or have not already created logins. So security, logins, there is a Y4 login. Perfect. So first I will go to not accessible. So user is not available here. No problem. So I will first delete the Y4 login here. And then I will delete the Y4 test that is in restoration process. But this is not over, because now what I want to do is to go to the destination for my database files and check if maybe I have some artifacts, and I do. If when we're done today, I will try to run the same script, I will simply fail to build my Creatio, but for a different reason, not because of the lack of resources, but because of some remaining artifacts. So I will delete these items also. Yeah, I'll need to run this as admin, sorry. But this is also not the end of it, because, well, actually it is, because I never ran even once. But no, in fact, there is a query for logging, so my Redis is no longer empty. So the last step would be to find my Redis, open radically exe, and what I need here, sorry, different window. And I need to select my database and flush it, or just flush the selected database. So that would be, I think, I need to check this. We can browse for this, but I think it's N4 flush DB. Flush DB. I'm not sure. Yeah, so maybe select or and flush DB. Yeah, so that would do it. So now I can safely retry to install. And well, by tomorrow we will have this installed and we will talk delivery. Okay, sorry for keeping a little bit longer for today. Thank you for joining. As usually, if you have any questions, your home assignment is to create new application, to create a traffic light object. We will use this to practice some binding and so on and so forth. Other items that are unavailable to cloud are definitely optional. They are not related to fast track assignment. So if you did manage to install locally, feel free to play around with Git. But the assignment is just this traffic. So today is a very light assignment. I would recommend also to recreate the steps exactly like I did. You don't really need the recording for that. It should be comparatively simple. But try to create new application, which is a custom application. Try to build an object without uh, references, without dependencies, see how it works, and then create dependencies. So recreate my steps that are related to traffic lights. Otherwise, we're seeing each other